here we go.
Now, if you followed my channel for a long time, then you know I absolutely love Hey Arnold. In fact, I go as far as to call it my favorite Nickelodeon show of all time at the moment. But I'm also a firm believer that very few, if any, shows have a perfect record. And a bad episode is a bad episode, no matter how much I like the show. I mean, most shows are bound to lose their grooves with a few episodes, which there's nothing wrong with. I mean, I don't hold a few bad episodes against an entire series, especially one that's filled with so many great episodes. And like most great shows, Hey Arnold had its fair share of duds. Now, everyone already knows about the infamous Arnold Betrays Iggy episode, which I discussed myself in my top 10 worst episodes of good cartoons video. So, because of that, I'm disqualifying it from this video. But rest assured, there are still a fair share of bad episodes that deserve to get ripped into. So, let's not waste any more time and let's rip into one of my all-time favorite shows. This is the top 5 worst Hey Arnold episodes.
Big ugly clown, oh, a big sad ugly clown, oh.
Full Moon. Now, Hey Arnold focused a lot on morals, which is one reason why I enjoy it so much. But when you focus so much on as many morals as you can, you're bound to get sloppy at some points, and that's what happens with this episode. It's about Harold, Stinky, and Sid mooning Principal Warts, and because they get away and Arnold is a witness, Warts' solution is to punish Arnold because he refuses to snitch on them, resulting in Arnold getting 4 weeks of detention and a potential blemish on his permanent record, and Harold threatens Arnold not to snitch on them. Well, to nitpick this episode a bit, Warts' actions here are just annoying. I mean, Warts is basically an eccentric character, so this isn't exactly anything new for him, but even with that, it's hard to find pleasure in watching Arnold being punished because he won't tell Warts who showed him their asses, even though the man should have been able to identify them very easily. But I consider that a minor complaint because I'm pretty sure that, in of itself, is a joke. That these masks are so shitty, yet Ward still can't identify the students. But what really sinks this episode is its morals feel really confused. Personally, I think this episode is trying to teach kids that they shouldn't let others suffer for their actions, and should own up when they do something wrong. But it's handled in a very poor way, because instead, the episode comes off more as a snitches get stitches kind of propaganda. Like it's saying if you tell on someone, even if you're being unfairly punished, everyone will hate you and you'll grow up being like Principal Warts, which alone would scare me off of doing anything.
I was stuffed into lockers, had kick me signs taped to my back.
Are you sure all that's because you're ratted?
I didn't have a date till I was 23.
Oh, no, that one's definitely not because you're ratted. But it feels like it's saying it's best for a kid who's being unfairly punished to just sit back and let guilt consume the other kid. Yeah, like that would ever happen. I'm not saying kids don't feel guilt or anything, but most kids, especially at this age, won't own up to their wrongdoings because getting in trouble scares them more than anything. So it sends out the wrong message if you're expecting a kid to own up to their wrongdoings, even if someone else gets blamed. I'm not saying no kid will ever do that, but the majority won't, no matter how much you hammer into them that they should. Now, that doesn't make them bad kids or anything, that just makes them kids. And even if a kid doesn't take this seriously, they'll more than likely just find this episode's attempt at doing this message to be pretty stupid. Which is, in of itself, a problem, because based off this episode's triumphant ending, this episode wants to be taken seriously.
I did it! It was me! I'm sorry! Arnold is completely innocent! I'm the mooner! I'm the mooner!
Now, to be fair, this episode isn't completely terrible. The start is pretty funny, and there are some good comedic moments sprinkled in.
Someone could put an eye out.
Because of mooning,
I'll ask the questions here.
This is by no means an unwatchable episode, but it is very stupid, and stupid should never be a word used to describe an episode of a show as smart as Hey Arnold. But if this is one of the absolute worst episodes from the series, I guess that says a lot about how good this series really was.
Big ugly clown, oh, a big sad ugly clown, oh.
Principal Simmons. Even though Warts was only a bit over the top in Full Moon, here, he's at his absolute worst. And not only is he at his absolute worst, so is practically every single other character in the entire series. In this episode, after Warts gets some criticism about his recent and, quite frankly, over-the-top harsh treatment of students, he decides to make a big scene and leave, making Mr. Simmons the new principal. And Mr. Simmons decides to use this opportunity to make the students' lives easier. But his plans end up failing, and the students end up becoming unruly little monsters and run amok throughout the entire school. Now, unlike Full Moon, where I had some minor issues and one major issue, this one is just mostly major issues. As I stated before, Warts is at his absolute worst in this episode. Even though I understand him being eccentric and overblowing how bad his situation is, here his tolerance level is at the lowest it's ever been. And on top of that, when he gets asked to tone it down a notch, he goes absolutely mental. It's almost embarrassing how unwilling he is to listen.
It's been brought to my attention by our superintendent and a certain Mr. Simmons that I'm not running the school in an appropriate manner. They don't need warts, they say. Well, you may think you don't need warts, but let me assure you, you do need warts.
Now this episode clearly wants to put Warts on a little lesson learning experience. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not against seeing in the slightest. In fact, this episode even tries to give you a little taste of Warts' psyche, which I actually would like to see. But not only do they do this by making him much worse than he's ever been, when he learns his lesson, it comes off as uncaring, as low as his apology to Meg for trying to bone her boyfriend in Go Stewie Go. It just ruins the episode's attempt at doing this.
I'll admit I did overreact with the students. I mean, no principal should ever call a small child a wicked-minded animal, even if it's true.
Also, when Simmons becomes principal and decides to let the students run the school with him, the students go fucking crazy with it. The episode basically becomes watching a bratty child run amok in the grocery store and the parents are doing nothing to stop it. It's obnoxious and makes you want to punch all of them. Now I get that's the point, because it's trying to say sometimes kids need to be disciplined, even if it makes you seem like the bad guy in their eyes. Because sometimes that's just the only way they'll learn. That's fine, and I'm all for that, but this episode is overblowing it to the point where the message gets totally lost and you're just left hating everyone. I mean, I like Mr. Simmons, and honestly this is a good lesson for him to learn. But the episode relies on so many cheap tactics and blowing everything as over the top as it can that it just hurts this episode tremendously. And I'd probably have put this episode a lot higher if it wasn't for the fact that I really like this scene.
I will prevail. I will not fail. You may have thrown me out the door, but I won't cry or weep or wail. Oh, I'll weather this storm too. Yes, I'll keep on smiling through.
This is probably the only scene on this list that's memorable for all the right reasons. It's a nice little reward you get for lasting through the horrible first half of this episode. So, that's more than I can say for the next 3 episodes on this list. But, make no mistake, this episode is still one of the worst episodes this show has to offer.
I will prevail. I will prevail.
Big ugly clown, oh, a big sad ugly clown, oh.
Bag of Money. Yeah, this is the sister episode of Principal Simmons. That's not troubling. Now, positive things about this one. Some of the only positive things I can actually say about it. One, I think this episode got some inspiration from The Fugitive, which is kinda cool. And two, I do get the intent. It's trying to talk about how greed can corrupt people in terrible ways. I really do understand that, but that's a topic that's really hard to discuss in an enjoyable way for a show like this. It's about Arnold, Gerald, and Sid finding a bag filled with thousands of dollars, and after discussing what to do with it, they decided it'd be best to turn it into the police station because they can get a reward for it and not worry about getting in trouble for finding it and not turning it in. But because Sid can't do it that day, they decide to leave the money with Arnold till the morning so they can all turn it in together. But while on the way to the police station, Arnold accidentally takes the wrong bag from an old, very distinguishable lady. Now this is why I think this episode was somewhat inspired by The Fugitive, at least the setup anyway. Because this is eerily similar to the movie where no one believes a man with one arm killed the main character's wife because it sounds too ridiculous.
A lady with a peg leg and one eyebrow.
And pink hair. That is the craziest story I've ever heard.
Well, I know it sounds a little weird, but it's true.
Now the complaint I hear a lot about this episode is Sid. And, yeah, I won't lie, Sid definitely hurts this episode. I mean, it's not like Sid's never been an asshole before. He's had those moments in episodes that are both good, like Hey Harold, and bad, like Arnold Betrays Iggy. But here, he's definitely overblown, just like Warts is in Principal Simmons. I mean, the entire episode, he's completely fishing for reasons to believe Arnold stole this money, and the kids aren't that much better either. I mean, I kinda get their reactions. No one likes someone they feel is a thief, but this feels like too much of a stretch that they wouldn't so much as question if Arnold could have done such a thing. I guess you can write that off as mob mentality, but I don't know, it still feels like they're being too easily persuaded. Hell, even Gerald starts listening to Sid and doubting Arnold. I mean, really? Gerald? Some best friend you got there, Arnaldo. Oh, okay, Gerald's change really isn't that infuriating, but it does still come off as a bit of an out-of-character moment for him. Though, to be fair, he is nowhere near as out of character as everyone else. Bottom line, this episode's problem is it focuses too hard on torturing Arnold. While I get that greed can make people do stupid things, this still feels like a bit of a stretch, and it's way too overblown to the point where it completely overshadows its message. And if it wasn't for them somewhat getting the ending right, I mean, Sid's apology still feels pretty shitty.
I treated you like a criminal and a common thief. I called you a liar.
Dude, that's not even the worst of what you did. And if it also wasn't for them putting some effort into making Sid's reasons for turning on Arnold somewhat understandable, it'd probably be in line for number 1 on this list. Yeah, this episode sucks.
Oh, come on. We're partners, right? Arnold! Arnold! Hey, Arnold!
Big ugly clown, oh, a big sad ugly clown, oh.
Student teacher. Hey, wait a minute! This one's the sister episode of Full Moon. How do you like that? Even when Hey Arnold is bad, it's consistent. Now on my top 10 best Hey Arnold episodes video, I put the episode Olga Comes Home on that list because, personally, I think Olga is a very overhated character. And I think sometimes they can discuss very serious topics with her in a pretty grown-up way. That being said, when I look at episodes like this, I really start to understand why so many people don't like her. This episode is about Olga coming home on break from college and wanting to spend it bonding with Helga, and surprising Helga by getting a student teacher job in her class in order to make sure they can spend as much time as possible together. But the whole time she's there, she keeps embarrassing Helga, making life hard on Helga, and basically treating every single student better than Helga. Now, there's a lot wrong with this episode. Minor things first, continuity. Continuity has become a tricky thing to discuss at this point, because it seems like so many shows have decided to start wiping their asses with it. Just take the very start of this episode, for example.
All she ever thinks about is herself. She's never cared about me. No wonder we don't get along. Oh well, Olga and I'll never be close.
That was like 5 lies in one sentence. What, did you forget about Olga Comes Home, where Olga and Helga have a very heartwarming moment and reveal they want to start becoming close with each other? Or Olga Gets Engaged, where Helga saves Olga from marrying a despicable 2-timing asshole? Yeah, you know what? Forget it. If you want to pretend those episodes never happened, be my guest. But at least keep Olga's character the same, because her character is totally shot here. First, Olga reveals she wants to bond with Helga because she took a development child psychology class. Well, since Olga's a straight-A student, I guess we can assume she knows exactly how children work now, right? So, what does she do when she becomes the student teacher? Well, she tells the class that Helga was a bedwetter because she feels her overcoming that would inspire them. She tells a room filled with 4th graders that her baby sister used to wet the bed. Yeah, how do you think that went?
Look, it's Helga, the bedwetter!
Olga is a complete idiot. You better damn well have failed that child psychology class, Olga, because you clearly have zero idea how kids work. And guess what else happens? Helga tries to get them to stop teasing her in her usual tough guy way, and Olga punishes her without even listening to her side of the story.
It's not a very nice way to play with your little friend. But nothing, baby sister. I'm gonna have to assign you detention for the rest of the week.
So on top of being a complete idiot, she's also a total jackass. Now, I guess this episode is trying to discuss how sometimes you need to make people listen to you. In fact, it straight out states that's what it's going for.
Olga is making me miserable.
Have you tried talking to her?
Only about 1,000 times. But she's too busy blabbing about how wonderful everything is to listen to me.
Then you have to make her listen to you.
But boy, did they fuck up Olga's character to send this message. I get that big siblings can be embarrassing, but for Olga to do the things she's doing, she'd have to be either a complete asshole or be as dumb as Peter Griffin. Her betrayal ruins the entire episode to the point where you don't give a damn what message they're trying to send. You're too fed up with Olga's actions and lack of actual care for her sister that it's actually satisfying when Helga makes her cry at the end. Plain and simple, this episode was a complete fiasco.
Love, Helga.
Oh, screw off with that fake heartwarming BS. Now, I do want to say, I probably could have turned this into a top 10 list, but I decided not to because, aside from the fact that the top 5 have so many things wrong with them as is, the first few spots of a top 10 worst list on this show would be either filled with episodes I really just have nitpicks with, or episodes that share very similar problems with other episodes on this list, but not to as bad of a degree. Case in point with these honorable mentions. Big Sis. This episode has very similar problems to Student Teacher, though they're not as bad. I think what really sets people off with this episode, though, is its ending, because it does feel like a big slap in the face after one of the only times Helga actually opens herself up to Olga. And I'd be lying if I said the ending didn't ruin this episode for me either. New bully on the block. Now, I get the hate for this episode. It's just an entire episode of 2 assholes forcing a bunch of kids to do, for lack of a better word, their dirty work. And it has scenes that feel very torture porn-esque for the 4th graders. And not to mention the new bully, Ludwig, feels like a very lazily done carbon copy of Wolfgang, which makes his inclusion feel like a wasted idea. But I'll be honest, this episode is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. While I know it's not by any means a good episode, I do still enjoy the football game between the 4th graders, and I'm not left as frustrated as other episodes on this list make me. Egg Story. Believe it or not, the biggest issue with this episode is Arnold. He just comes off very stubborn and so unwilling to listen to Helga that it's actually a really out of character portrayal for him. Don't get me wrong, it's not like Helga hasn't given him reason to do so, but he kind of just takes the opportunity very out of the blue in this episode that it just feels like the wrong time to have him finally put his foot down. But credit where it's due, this episode does get saved for me by its actually decent ending. That feels a lot better than the endings in Full Moon or Student Teacher. Anyway, let's get into the worst episode from this show, not named Arnold Betrays Iggy.
Big ugly clown, oh, big sad ugly clown, oh.
Curly's Girl. Now this is a very rare kind of episode for me, because it's one of the few that I really don't understand. Whereas all the other episodes on this list, I understand what they were going for. Hell, even Arnold Betrays Iggy, I understood what they were going for. This one, I'm just left baffled by. Here, I'll sum up the majority of the episode like this. Rhonda ruins a really expensive coat her father is planning to give her mother for her birthday, and Curly offers to fix it if she agrees to be his girlfriend for a week. Oh, and don't worry, he totally plans ahead to make sure she doesn't back out of their deal.
I'll just take a couple of pictures so you don't back out of the deal.
Well, blackmail, isn't that great? And once that week is up, Rhonda breaks up with him, which, for the record, Curly agreed to, and everyone in school hates her. So what's the moral here? That it's okay to blackmail and force someone to date you, so long as they did something that was mildly stupid? Or was this episode not going for a moral and just trying to be strictly comedic? If so, then it resorted to the cheapest thing a comedic episode can do. It completely destroyed its characters to fit the humor. That is something I am heavily against any show doing. If you can't get your humor across without making your characters act uncharacteristic, then it's humor you really should not be trying. Here's just a small taste of how unlikable all the students are to Rhonda.
May I borrow the black paint, Helga?
Perfect. It'll match the color of your heart.
Excuse me?
You heard me, Cruella.
Hey, who the hell are you to judge, Helga? It's not like you never broke anyone's heart before. Oh, right, continuity doesn't exist in shows anymore. My bad. But there's scenes like this also.
You ladies want to join me?
As a matter of fact, we don't.
Isn't Nadine Rhonda's best friend? I don't care if you follow continuity or not. That's something you can't just pretend doesn't exist. I mean, what's with the show relying on making best friends easily persuaded to turn their backs? And I know what you're thinking. They don't know Rhonda was being blackmailed. It's not their fault. Well, that's my point. They don't know because, well, Rhonda doesn't even say anything. I mean, I get at first she's not allowed to because it's part of the deal. But once they break up, there was nothing I can recall stated where Rhonda couldn't tell people what happened. So, I have no idea why she doesn't tell anyone. And even then, you would still think characters like Arnold and Nadine would at least try to talk to her about this. Again, these are characters Rhonda knows she can confide in, but she doesn't do that, and neither of them even try to talk to her. Arnold spends the whole time comforting Curly, and Nadine just concludes she's an evil bitch like everyone else. I mean, that seems like too much of a stretch. That it makes the episode look even more like it doesn't know what it's trying to be. And I mean, I get that when Rhonda breaks up with him, she's very harsh about it.
You're a low-down, despicable creep. It's over between us. I never want to speak to you again. Now crawl back under the rock you came out of, you slug.
But that doesn't make her treatment any better because she's forced into this relationship she doesn't want. If anything, the whole situation makes the way she breaks up with him look even more justified. Yet, the episode insinuates Curly's the good guy, because once Rhonda decides to start being his girlfriend so people will like her again, Curly breaks up with her so she can be free and people won't hate her. Well, that's great. That made me completely forget that you blackmailed her into dating you.
Saucy specimen like you pretending to like a guy like me. So I let you off the hook.
Well, thank you, Curly. That was very nice of you.
What? No, it wasn't! Literally every other thing Curly's done up to this point has been sleazy, underhanded, and manipulative. Him letting you off the hook for a problem he caused you and forced on you is considered nice? Just, this episode is a mess. I mean, this has very similar problems to Arnold Betrays Iggy. It clearly doesn't know who the bad guy is. It clearly doesn't know how to keep its characters in character. It relies on so many forced and cheap tactics to try and get whatever humor it's going for across. It just feels like an episode where they totally gave up. You know, if this is just a bad attempt at dark humor, then I can write it off as just that, a bad comedic attempt. But if this was meant to teach a lesson, if this was meant to have a moral, I don't know how that moral can be interpreted other than it's okay to blackmail someone into dating you and making yourself look like the victim because of it. And if that's the case, then this episode would probably rival Arnold Betrays Iggy as the worst thing to ever come out of this series. Well, that was a lot of fun. Like I said, not all shows are going to be perfect. Every show has a blemish on its record, an episode or 5 that show off the worst of it. So, as long as a show can manage to get a lot more good out of it, then episodes like this can easily be forgotten. And Hey Arnold is one of those shows. It's filled with so many phenomenal episodes that it's really hard to pinpoint where to start. So, I would recommend starting here if you want to see the best this show has to offer. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.